There's a lie we tell ourselves about evil. We think it comes with a warning. We think the people who are going to destroy our lives will look like monsters, sound like villains, and carry a weapon we can see. I'm here to tell you that the most dangerous person you will ever meet won't break your door down. They will walk inside because you open it for them. They will pour you a cup of coffee. They will look into your exhausted, bloodshot eyes, hold your shaking hands, and tell you that you need to rest. They will tell you that they are going to take care of everything, and you will thank God for them, right up until the moment you realize they are burying you alive. My name is Victor, and I spent my entire life building a fortress around the woman I love. It took the girl we raised as our own daughter exactly 4 months to sell the bricks. This is the story of how I lost everything, and the completely silent, terrifying way I got all back. Before you can understand betrayal, you have to understand the stakes. I am 71 years old. I spent 35 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Seattle. I built bridges. I reinforced concrete. I spent my life obsessed with structures that do not collapse under pressure. But my greatest structure was my marriage to Sarah. Sarah was the kind of woman who made you feel like you were the only person in a crowded room. She was an elementary school teacher, a woman who possessed a reservoir of patience, so deep it bordered on the supernatural. We bought a modest, 3-bedroom craftsman house in a quiet neighborhood in 1988. We paid off the mortgage in 2011. We didn't take lavish vacations. We drove Hondas until the wheels fell off. We packed our lunches. We did this because I had a fear that gnawed at the back of my mind every single night. What if I go first? I wanted Sarah to be untouchable. So, over 35 years, we built a nest egg, just over $480,000, sitting safely in a high-yield trust. It wasn't yacht money, but it was safety money. It was our shield against the world. We had a son, Julian. Julian was tough, rough around the edges. He struggled in school, got into fights, and preferred the smell of motor oil to textbooks. He became a heavy machinery welder. Julian and I butted heads constantly. He was a black sheep, and for a long time, we didn't know how to talk to each other. And then there was Rachel. Rachel wasn't ours by blood. She was Sarah's niece. When Rachel was 14, her parents died in a horrific car accident on I-5. Sarah didn't even hesitate. She drove to child services, signed the papers, and brought Rachel home. Rachel moved into our spare bedroom. We paid for her braces. We paid for her prom dress. We paid for her college tuition at the University of Washington. Rachel was a golden child. Brilliant, polished, ambitious. She graduated with honors, went into investment consulting in Bellevue, married a slick commercial real estate broker named David, and drove a spotless Audi. She wore power suits and commanded rooms. Whenever she came over, the house felt brighter. Sarah beamed with pride. I thought we had done a good job. I thought we had raised a spectacular human being. I was a fool. They say lightning never strikes the same place twice. I don't believe that. I think sometimes the sky just decides it hates you. When Sarah was 66, she started forgetting words. Not big words. Simple things. Spatula, keys, Tuesday. At first, we laughed it off as getting older. But then came the afternoon, I found her standing in the kitchen, crying hysterically, holding a can of soup because she had completely forgotten how a can opener worked. The diagnosis was frontotemporal dementia, FTD. If you don't know what FTD is, I pray you never have to find out. It doesn't just erase your memory. It attacks the frontal lobes. It alters your personality, your empathy, your behavior. It hollows out the person you love and leaves behind a frightened, sometimes angry shell who looks exactly like your wife. The day we got the diagnosis, my life as a husband ended, and my life as a caregiver began. Let me tell you about sleep deprivation. It's not just feeling tired. It is a physical torture. It feels like wearing a wet lead suit at the bottom of a swimming pool. Your brain misfires. Your vision blurs. You lose your temper at inanimate objects. For 2 years, I didn't sleep more than 3 hours at a time. Sarah would wake up at 2 a.m., convinced there were intruders in the hallway. I would have to sit against the bedroom door, holding it shut, whispering to her for hours just to keep her calm. I was bathing her. I was feeding her. I was managing 15 different pill bottles. I was drowning in a pitch-black ocean, and the shoreline was miles away. Julian would come by on Sundays. My rough, blue-collar son. He wouldn't say much. He'd just walk in with grease under his fingernails, kiss his mother's forehead, fix the leaky sink, mow the lawn, and leave a six-pack of beer in the fridge. But Rachel started showing up in her suits. It happened in month 4 of Sarah's severe decline. I was sitting at the kitchen table. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but it felt like midnight. I had a stack of medical bills in front of me. Thick, confusing envelopes filled with insurance jargon I physically did not have the cognitive function to decipher. I was staring at them, practically catatonic. The front door opened. It was Rachel. She walked in carrying 2 large bags from a high-end Italian restaurant. She smelled like expensive perfume. She looked like an angel descending into a war zone. "Uncle Vic," she said. Her voice was pure silk, soft, maternal. She put the food down, walked over, and placed her hands on my shoulders. I felt the tension in my neck, tight as a piano wire, throb. "You look like a ghost," she whispered. I broke. I am a proud man, but I put my face in my hands and I wept. I told her I was failing. I told her I couldn't keep the bills straight. I told her I was terrified I would make a mistake, and the insurance would drop Sarah's coverage. Rachel pulled up a chair. She sat right next to me. She reached into her leather designer bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder. "I manage millions of dollars for a living, Uncle Vic," she said, her eyes welling with perfectly timed tears. "You are killing yourself trying to be a nurse and an accountant. You just need to be a husband. Let me do what I do best." She opened the folder. It was a comprehensive legal power of attorney packet, drafted by a top-tier law firm. It granted her full, unmitigated control over my bank accounts, the trust, and the deed to the house. "It's just a formality," she promised. "It allows me to call the insurance companies without you having to sit on hold for 3 hours. It lets me automate the bills. Everything will stay in your name. I just hold the keys, so you don't have to carry the weight." I looked at the girl who used to do her high school algebra at this very table. The girl my wife had saved from the foster care system. My eyes were burning. My hands were shaking. I was so exhausted I could barely read my own name. I picked up the pen, and I signed away the fortress. For the next 8 months, I thought I was living in a miracle. Rachel was incredible. The threatening envelopes from the hospital stopped arriving. The light stayed on. She told me the trust was not only safe, but she had moved it into better mutual funds, and it was growing. She would come over twice a week. She'd sit with Sarah, brush her hair, and talk to her in that slow, patient voice you use for toddlers. Sarah would smile at her. I would stand in the doorway, watching them, thanking whatever God was listening that we had this girl in our lives. But here's what I didn't know. I didn't know that Rachel had immediately gone to the post office and put a permanent forwarding order on all my mail, routing my bank statements to a P.O. box in Bellevue. I didn't know she had changed my online banking passwords. And I didn't know that every time she brushed my dying wife's hair, she was wearing a new piece of jewelry paid for with our life savings. The illusion shattered on a rainy Thursday in November. My phone rang. It was Julian. "Dad," he said. His voice wasn't his usual low, casual rumble. It was tight, razor thin. It sounded like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "I need you to tell Mom you're going to the pharmacy. Come down to my shop. Right now." "Julian, I can't leave her. She's having a bad day." "Dad, I am not asking. Now." I arranged for my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, to sit with Sarah for an hour. I drove my old Honda down to the industrial district. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the Seattle streets into a blur of gray. When I walked into Julian's metal fabrication shop, the heavy welding torches were off. It was dead silent. The air smelled like ozone and burnt steel. Julian was sitting at a scarred metal workbench under a single, flickering fluorescent light. In front of him was a stack of papers. They were covered in yellow highlighter. Julian didn't look at me when I walked in. He just stared at the papers. I was at the county clerk's office pulling commercial permits for a warehouse job. Julian said quietly, "I saw your name on a public registry." I asked the clerk to pull the file. He slid the first piece of paper across the steel table. "Dad, What is this? I picked it up, my eyes strained in the dim light. It was a home equity line of credit, taken out against my house on Elm Street, the house I had paid off 13 years ago. The amount was $250,000. The signature at the bottom was Rachel's, signed as my legally authorized proxy. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I don't know what this is. Julian, I didn't authorize a loan. Julian's jaw clenched so hard, I thought his teeth would crack. He slid a second paper across the desk. Do you know what this is? It was a bank ledger. Julian had an old high school buddy who worked in fraud compliance at my bank. Julian had gone to him, explained his terrifying suspicion, and begged for a quiet, off-the-record look at the accounts. I stared at the numbers on the page. The $480,000. The money that was supposed to put Sarah in a world-class memory care facility. The money that was supposed to keep her safe when my body finally gave out. The balance on the screen was $14,212. She's bleeding you dry, Julian whispered. His voice vibrated with rage, so deep it made the hair on my arm stand up. She took the equity. She drained the savings. She's been doing structured withdrawals. $9,000 here, $8,500 there. To avoid federal flagging, she's funneling it into an LLC registered in her husband David's name. They're using your money to cover David's failed commercial real estate investments. They're stealing Mom's life. I stood there in the cold. I couldn't breathe. It felt like someone had shoved a block of ice down my throat. I pictured Rachel. I pictured her bringing the coffee. I pictured her crying those perfectly timed tears. She hadn't come to save us. She had watched the sinking ship, rowed her lifeboat over, and started stripping the gold off the walls before the water took us under. Julian stood up. He kicked his metal stool so hard it flew across the shop and slammed into a steel beam with a deafening crash. I'm going to kill her, he roared. I'm driving to Bellevue, and I'm going to rip her front door off the hinges. No. The word came out of me not as a panic, but as a completely dead sound. Julian turned to me, his chest heaving. Are you kidding me? Dad, she stole $500,000. I know. I looked at my hands. These hands had built bridges. These hands had bathed my dying wife. And these hands had signed a paper that gave a monster the knife to cut our throats. If you're listening to this, and you think you know what absolute blinding hatred feels like, let me assure you, you do not. Anger is hot. Anger makes you yell. What I felt in that moment was ice. Absolute 0-degree ice. It didn't make me want to scream. It made me want to erase her. If you go to her house, I told my son, my voice eerily calm, she will panic. She's a finance expert, Julian. She knows the loopholes. If she knows we're on to her, she will wire whatever is left into an offshore account, file for bankruptcy, and tie us up in civil court for 5 years. Sarah doesn't have 5 years. Sarah doesn't have 5 months. Julian stared at me. The rage in his eyes slowly morphed into something else. Shock. He had never heard me speak like this. Then what do we do? He asked. We let her keep thinking I'm a tired, stupid, dying old man. And we build a cage so tight she can't even breathe. For the next 3 weeks, I put on the greatest psychological performance of my entire life. I want you to imagine the sheer mental torture of what I had to do. Twice a week, Rachel would come to my house. She would sit in my living room. She would drink my coffee. And I had to look at the woman who was actively murdering my wife's future, and I had to smile. I had to play the grateful, senile uncle. Rachel, what would we do without you? I would say, my hand shaking. Oh, Uncle Vic. She'd smile, patting my arm, wearing a new $5,000 Cartier watch. Family takes care of family. Every time she touched me, my skin crawled. Every time she spoke, I wanted to wrap my hands around her throat. But I swallowed the bile. I played my part. Meanwhile, Julian and I went to war in the shadows. Julian didn't hire a standard family lawyer. He went digging through his contacts and found a ghost, a man named Elias Vance. Elias was a former federal prosecutor who had spent 15 years hunting white-collar criminals for the DOJ before moving to private practice. He specialized in elder financial exploitation. We met Elias in a windowless conference room in downtown Seattle. I laid everything on the table. Elias didn't just review the bank statements. He pulled Rachel's entire financial life apart. Because she had used the power of attorney to execute the fraud, she had left a digital footprint. And what Elias found was staggering. Rachel wasn't just stealing. She was arrogant. She had forged my signature on secondary loan documents to bypass the POA limits. She had transferred funds across state lines, which meant she had committed textbook federal wire fraud. And the LLC she transferred the money into, it had previously applied for federal business grants. She didn't just rob you, Victor, Elias said, taking off his glasses. She defrauded a federally insured institution. She crossed the line into FBI jurisdiction. If we do this right, we don't just take her money, we take her freedom. For 14 days, we built the trap. We worked entirely in secret. Elias drafted emergency ex parte injunctions. He coordinated quietly with a contact in the FBI's white-collar crime division in Seattle. The feds loved it. It was a slam-dunk case of elder abuse wrapped in a neat little bow of wire fraud. Through the courts, Elias secured a quiet, instant freeze on the LLC, Rachel's personal accounts, and David's brokerage accounts. The freeze was timed perfectly. It wouldn't hit the banking system until a Friday afternoon at 4:55 p.m., meaning Rachel wouldn't get notification until it was far too late to move a single dime. The vault was sealed. She was locked inside. Now, all I had to do was turn off the oxygen. The trap snapped shut on the night of Rachel's 39th birthday. She had suggested we celebrate at our house. Let's just keep it easy for Aunt Sarah, she had told me on the phone, playing the saint to the very bitter end. She arrived at 6 p.m. with her husband, David. David was wearing a tailored suit. Rachel was wearing a stunning black dress and a diamond tennis bracelet that I knew, with mathematical certainty, was paid for with my wife's suffering. The dining room table was set perfectly. The good china, the silver. Sarah was seated in her wheelchair at the head of the table. She was wearing a soft pink sweater. She was having a good day, which meant she was quiet, humming a song only she could hear, smiling vaguely at the lights. Rachel poured a $150 bottle of wine. She filled David's glass. She filled mine. She stood up at the table. She raised her glass. I just want to say a few words, Rachel beamed, looking around the room. Her eyes settled on me. This year has been hard. Aunt Sarah's illness has tested all of us, but it has also reminded me of what matters. To family, to taking care of each other. She smiled. David smiled. Before I could raise my glass, the front door opened. It wasn't locked. I had made sure of that. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hardwood hallway. Rachel stopped smiling. She turned around. Julian walked into the dining room. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing his heavy Carhartt work jacket, smelling of rain and cold air. He didn't look like the black sheep tonight. He looked like an executioner. Julian, Rachel said, her voice faltering slightly. We weren't expecting you. I know, Julian said. He didn't sit down. He just stood by the archway, his arms crossed. Seconds later, 3 more people walked in behind him. They were wearing dark windbreakers. The letters FBI were printed small, but very clearly, on the badges hooked to their belts. 2 uniformed Seattle police officers stood behind them in the hallway. The room went completely, terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the window panes. The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with eyes like flat stones, stepped forward. Rachel Miller? Rachel dropped her wine glass. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 pieces. The dark red wine pooled around her expensive designer heels like blood. What is this? David stammered, stepping back, his face draining of all color. Rachel Miller, you are under arrest for felony elder financial abuse, wire fraud, and grand larceny, the agent said. Her voice was entirely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a machine executing code. David Miller, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The 2 officers stepped forward. They grabbed David, slammed him against the dining room wall, and cuffed him. Rachel was paralyzed. She looked at the agents. She looked at Julian. And then, finally, she looked at me. The mask didn't just slip. It completely shattered. There was no grace, No poise. No polished Bellevue consultant. Just a panicked, cornered, desperate animal she had always been beneath the silk suits. "Uncle Vic," she gasped, her hand shaking violently as the female agent grabbed her wrists, pulling them painfully behind her back. The zip ties made a sharp zip sound that echoed in the silent room. "Uncle Vic, please. There's a mistake. Tell them. Tell them I was helping you. Tell them I'm family." I didn't stand up. I remained seated at the head of the table. I looked at the dark red wine soaking into the rug. Then I looked up into her terrified eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I spoke in a voice so quiet she had to stop crying just to hear me. "The only mistake I made, Rachel," I whispered, "was thinking you had a soul. But the moment that will haunt me and her for the rest of our natural lives happened next. Because of the shouting, the breaking glass, and the police, Sarah snapped out of her daze. My beautiful, broken wife looked around the room. Her dementia was profound. Her brain could not process violence or arrest or betrayal. Her brain processed a sudden influx of people and noise as a celebration. Sarah looked at Rachel, who was sobbing hysterically in handcuffs. Sarah smiled her warmest, brightest, most loving smile. She clapped her hands together like a child. "Oh," Sarah said brightly. "Are you going on a trip, dear? It looks like you're going on a trip. Be safe. Bring me back a magnet." Rachel stopped struggling. She looked at the aunt who had raised her. She looked at the woman who had bought her prom dress. She looked at the woman whose life savings she had drained to buy luxury cars and jewelry. And in that moment, forced to look at Sarah's pure, unbroken innocence, Rachel broke. She didn't just cry. She wailed, a guttural, wretched, soul-tearing sound. Because in that exact second, she realized the ultimate punishment. She could never manipulate Sarah again. She could never explain herself. Sarah would forever remember her as a sweet girl going on a trip, completely, blissfully immune to Rachel's poison. Sarah's broken brain was the ultimate shield. They marched Rachel and David out into the freezing Seattle rain. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the living room. When the door finally closed, the house fell silent again. Julian walked over to the table. He picked up a napkin, crouched down, and started wiping up the spilled wine. I looked at my son, the boy with the grease on his hands, the boy I had overlooked for 30 years. I got out of my chair. I knelt down on the floor next to him, and for the first time in 20 years, I hugged my son. We held on to each other on the floor of the dining room, and we wept. Justice is not a movie. It doesn't end when the credits roll. David, being the coward he is, flipped on Rachel the second they put him in an interrogation room. He gave the feds everything in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years. Rachel didn't even go to trial. The paper trail of lies the FBI had built was so airtight, so devastatingly complete, that her public defender advisor take a plea deal immediately. Rachel Miller was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Because of the immediate freezes Elias had placed on their accounts and the force, court-ordered liquidation of David's commercial properties and Rachel's assets. We recovered the money, all of it, plus damages. 2 months later, Sarah moved into a breathtaking, state-of-the-art memory care facility overlooking the Puget Sound. She has a room with a window that faces the water. She has round-the-clock nurses who treat her with absolute dignity. She is safe. I sold the house on Elm Street. It was too big, and there were too many ghosts. I bought a small one-bedroom condo exactly 4 minutes away from Julian's house. I sleep now, not perfectly. I still wake up at 2 a.m. sometimes, my heart pounding, listening for footsteps in the hall. But I sleep. Julian comes over every Sunday. We don't talk about Rachel. We sit on the back porch. We drink cheap black coffee, and we watch the neighborhood wake up. I spent my entire life thinking I knew exactly who my family was. I thought the girl in the polished suit was a savior, and the boy with the dirt on his hands was a burden. When the walls finally caved in, the suit tried to bury me alive. The boy with the dirt on his hands dug me out. Protect your family. Build your fortresses. But before you hand over the keys to the gate, pay very, very close attention to exactly who is standing outside.